So, namaste, vanakkam, hola, bonjour, bom dia, privyet, and hello everyone. Hearty greetings and warm wishes to all from Adia. We hope and wish that all of you, along with your families and loved ones, are safe and healthy. Today, we welcome you all on this very special occasion of celebrating not just any anniversary of Adia Day, but the centenary anniversary, because we know that it started in 1922. And therefore, we have great pleasure to bring something special and different to you today. But before we begin the program, let us come together in heart and mind to invoke the blessings of that immutable, ever beneficent principle in which we live, move, and have our being. O hidden light, vibrant in every atom, O hidden light, shining in every creature, O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May all who feel themselves as one with Thee know they are therefore one with every other. Welcome back. Those who have visited Adyar in person, in imagination, or heard stories about it, know that Adyar is like a paradise on earth, sacred and holy, one of the spiritual oases in the middle of materialistic desert of the world, from where the vibrations of love, harmony, healing, and brotherhood always permeate the world. And on Adia Day, all the members around the world put their attention towards Adia, sending these blessings back. And so, to start with today's Adia Day celebration, I request we bring to you Sister Jayashree Kannan, who is working for a long time in TS Adyar and currently heading the archives department, which also incidentally having its centenary year this year. Sister Jayashree will begin with a chant, Maitrim Bhajata, a prayer for world peace.
Maitrim Bhajata Akhila Hrijetri Maitrim Bhajata Akhila Hrijetri Atmavadeva Paranapi Pashyata Atmavadeva Paranapi Pashyata Yuddham Tyajata Spardha Tadata Yuddham Tyajata Spardha Tyajata Tyajata Pareshva Kramakramanam Maitrim Bhajata Akhila Hritetrim Janani Prithvi Kamadudaste Janani Prithvi Kamadudaste Janako Deva Sakala Dayalu Damyata Data Dayadvam Janata Damyata Data Dayadvam Janata.
We thank Sister Jayashree, and after that beautiful and uplifting chant that we have received from her as always, we will also share a video provided by TS America. It is an audio narrative by Fritz Kunz, and it is about his introduction to the Theosophical Society and how he met Colonel Olcott and C.W. Leadbeater. Let us remember that Fritz Kunz was the initiator of Adyar Day 100 years ago. He was also a writer, lecturer, educator, associated to T.S. Adyar, who had the opportunity to meet remarkable theosophies and work with remarkable theosophies as Annie Besant, Henry Steele Olcott, C.W. Leadbeater, when he was a young man. And he's also known for being the husband of another eminent theosophist, Dora Kunz. So now we will share this audio description, and we hope you enjoy it.
I shall arrive at Mrs. Besant in due time, but actually what I want to say to you begins with her. If you could travel in time to September 1893, and in space 100 miles west of here, you would see a boy 5 years 4 months old in front of 26 Apple Street, Freeport, Illinois, being given 39 copper cents by his family as reward for not going to Chicago to see the World's Columbian Exposition. This boy knew it was bribery and corruption, and he knew he was being done in, you understand? Nobody was kidding him. But after all, 39 copper cents is a lot of money. I don't know what became of it actually afterward. This family, of course, was my family, and I was that small boy. Why were they going to the World's Columbian Exposition? To hear Annie Besant. Of course, we didn't know much about her in those days, but already my family was a little acquainted with the theosophical ideas, not very much. They were mostly still agnostics, followers of various, realistic preachers of the time. They kind of, people went about and talked against the church and all the orthodoxy, I mean. So they went largely out of curiosity, and they all went. 9 people, except me. See? I was left there with an aunt across the street, burning with distrust of the whole civilized system that I'm left behind. And when they came back, they walked on air. I remember all this very vividly, you know. One does, you know, certain things in childhood, they can be very vivid. I remember how they talked and how they went about and what they said and so on, and how exalted they were with the excitement of Mrs. Besant, you know, showing her allegiance to the theosophical philosophy and all that kind of thing. You know, she'd only joined the society a few years before, in 1889 or 1890, something like that. And she was at the peak of her initial enthusiasm, you know, that breathless enthusiasm you have at the beginning, and in her much greater. Swami Vivekananda was there also, and Dharmapala, that well-known Buddhist disciple, a member of the Hevavitarana family, was there. And all these names began to be familiar. They were household words. In a way, therefore, you see, I owe a grudge against Mrs. Besant from the beginning, because I was left behind. But I've outlived that. As for C.W. Well, I met him when I was just a boy. I can't fix the date exactly, but I couldn't have been younger than 12 and certainly not older than 14, perhaps 13. He came later on to Freeport. I might mention first that Olcott came before that, and I might just mention him, for I met him there in this my hometown. We put on a lecture in the local theater, and all sorts of people came out of curiosity, because my family was rather well known in the town and so on, you know. And he gave one of his stirring discourses on magnetic healing and the whole question of forces, psychodynamic forces, forces other than the physical and like that. And I got to know him personally, you know, because he stayed with my father's partner just up the street. My father was in China importing business, and we got to know Alcott personally. He was a little man, a little bit of a man, but oh, he impressed you with his power and his certitude. He also had a slight cast in one eye, you know, a slightly wall eye. You might think this would make him undignified. It only made him more terrifying. There was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Yeah. He never had any doubts at all. He was an extraordinary person. And that is why the society is what it is. Because he never faltered in control of it, in management of it, in liberalizing it, in organizing it so that it would succeed, so it would live through the future, with enough flexibility, you know. Very remarkable and very impressive person. I saw him later in India, when I arrived there with C.W. Leadbeater, and then met Mrs. Besant also in December 1905. And he was still very vital, although not more than 2 or 3 a year or so from his death. Very impressive person. And what Dora said about Bishop Leadbeater, you must understand in connection with Alcott. Alcott was the president of the society. From Leadbeater's point of view, that was the king. You see that? That was the king. That was the boss. Anything that he finally wanted, you did, because you don't let your side down, you see. He had that same feeling, and not so profoundly about the occult side with Alcott, but about the management of the society. And this led to a very serious business in later years, very serious business indeed. But that never altered Leadbeater's loyalty, you understand? He was a man who had nothing but loyalty toward the cause and the masters and his chiefs. Well, Alcott was a very fascinating man because he had this magnetic power, and I actually saw him in order to dismiss him, so to speak. I saw him in Adyar Cure Man in 1905. It was the simplest thing you could ever possibly see. Some Indians brought a chap who was demented, and he was irresponsible, and he talked wildly. His eyes were red, and he was restless, almost uncontrollable. They brought him, shepherded him along, and they showed him to Alcott, and Alcott made some passes over to get a feeling of the man. And then he called for about a half a glass of water, and he held it in his hand like this and intensified his will on this water, and then he handed this water to the man, this demented man, and he said to him with tremendous clarity and conviction and will, you see, "You will now drink 1/3 of this." And the man, overcome by the magnetic certitude, as it were, of Alcott, drank that 1/3, you know, trembling to obey, so to speak. And then Alcott gave the water to the people who had brought him and said, "Now when you get him home to the place nearby where they were going to take him, he drinks a second 1/3, he said that to the man too, you see, and he'll go to sleep at once. And when he wakes up, he will drink the final 1/3 and he will be entirely well." They took the man away to another part of the Adyar compound and carried this through. And the fellow was brought back the next day. I saw the denouement as well, and he was just as normal, I was going to say as I am. Maybe I'm not very normal. As normal as anybody could be, all by one treatment. In his heyday, this was when he was old, he did this day after day for thousands of people in India, in front of hundreds of thousands of people. You see, he was an occultist in his own way. Well, anyhow, about Leadbeater. He came to Freeport when I was a lad, and he visited at our house. The lectures he gave were in our house, and I was shyer than Dora, really. Actually, I was really almost neurotically shy boy. I was not very developed for my years. I don't say I was a case of arrested development, but I came on slowly anyhow. And I remember coming in, first walking around the house a lot outside, frightened to come in because he was an overwhelmingly impressive man. But finally I did come in. My mother was sitting near the door to this music room. We had a large music room, and where Leadbeater was speaking, and he came from nearby, so he was in slippers. He loved to be in slippers. And he was talking along, and he finished the discourse, and I was standing behind my mother, sort of peeping around the corner like that. and he kept looking at me. And then he said very quietly, more or less as part of his discourse, he said, I see another person has joined the audience, and he's hiding behind, I suppose that's his mother. And he said, what he forgets is that his aura sticks out in every direction. Of course, this entertained the people in the room immensely. I vanished, believe me, I vanished at once. With confidence in front of these people later that afternoon, and invited me to come and see him. He was traveling with Basil Hodgson Smith, a very lovable young man. So I went to see C.W.L., and he talked with me quietly about various little things and so on, made friends with me. And then he came back to our house, walked down with me, and so did Basil come. And we just sort of made friends, you see. He was tremendously impressive, and I knew at once that this was, I've had this all my life, this was somebody that counted. This was somebody you could tie to, so to speak. Well, we got to know him a little bit then, and then later on, and of course we went to the lectures and that sort of thing. And then later on he came back to the United States a second time on his second visit, and we got to know him better because something happened. Several things happened. One was that one of my sisters fell ill, and she had to go to California on account of her health. Another sister went to look after her, and I was taken along. And Leadbeater was out there lecturing in California. And we went to all the meetings. He welcomed children at his meetings, you know. He would shape his discourses to hold your attention a little bit, and so on. And he invited me to stay with him and Basil, and Thomas Prime, the man who painted the pictures in thought forms, and a young man, a boy, that had been foisted on C.W. Leadbeater, who was the cause of great difficulty afterward, a very unsatisfactory person, whom Leadbeater had saved from epilepsy, and whose father had asked him to take the boy along from a Canadian city as far as San Francisco. And while they were in San Francisco, the father disappeared into eastern Canada and said, I don't have money to bring him here. So Leadbeater was committed to carry this boy a little further. He'd take him down to Los Angeles. And this went on, I'll just finish that story, till finally they traveled, this little party traveled back to New Orleans or thereabout, and then he was near enough to Toronto to send the boy back. A boy he had only saved from a serious disease. A boy who later betrayed Leadbeater. A boy who later resumed epilepsy. And a boy who, when I was in ADR many years later, wrote the most abject and pitiful letter that you could ever read, imploring Leadbeater to save him, though he had betrayed C.W.L. Blaming himself, you see, for unconscionable thing. C.W.L. said, write him kindly and say if we could do something from a distance we would, and so on, and that was that. Well, anyhow, I stayed with this party at La Jolla, and then I got to know C.W.L. rather well. And what Dora said is desperately and doubly true of boys. Of boys with him. You went swimming in the cold sea, you know, and you did what you could about being cold or warm. And I was a fraidy cat about cold water. I loved swimming, but I didn't like cold water. And you went for long walks, and you ate porridge. I got all my manners from him, too. My family was a very simple family, and we didn't have many graces, but he saw to it that you did and said the right thing, and there was no getting away from it, you know. I shall never forget the first time we were having a meal in La Jolla, and he was dishing the food out, you see, and his spoon poised above the peas, and he said to me very politely, some peas, and I said yes, and he looked at me in astonishment, and I didn't know what to do. So I said yes, and so he said, please, and I've said please ever since. I have never forgotten. Oh, I owe him a debt. I won't go into all that. I owe him a debt that could never be repaid. Never. Everything I found out about sexual matters and so on, I got from him in the purest and clearest and the most impersonal way possible. I was somebody he liked, you see. He had come to like me on my own account. I was one of his people, if you like. Marvelous man, absolutely marvelous man. Absolutely fearless. He did what should be done, and that was that. Well, I got to know him. And then we went back home, my sisters and I, and he invited me to come and stay with Mrs. Minnie Holbrook in Newton Highlands. She had a house party, you see, of various people. That was fascinating too. There was a lady there from Philadelphia, Miss Eugenia McFarlane was her name then. She married a man named Balch afterward. She was a painter, and Leadbeater got out the little miniature that the Master Kuthumi had painted by John Farley, not this Varley. John Farley painted by materializing the hand of Varley in the Master's house. He painted 2 miniatures of the Master K.H. And one morning, Basil Hodgson Smith, waked up, and there was this miniature under his pillow. He carried it with him everywhere, Basil did. And he gave permission, and so did CWL, that Miss McFarlane should copy this large. And that is a portrait, one of the portraits we have of the Master Kuthumi. Well, it was a wonderful thing to be in a house party, you know, with other boys and Miss Tuttle from Montana and like that. He taught us every day privately. And I told some of you down in Florida a while ago something he did to me, which had I not been a stout material, I would certainly have died of shame on that occasion. Sometime we'll get civilized, you see. Those will be silent when we have anti-gravity machines. All right. One day they were talking about telepathy in the group, you see, and he was talking largely for the adults, but he always made it available to the young people clustered around. And they said, is it really possible to transfer a thought like that without question? We said, yes, I will show you if Fritz is willing. And of course I was willing. I don't know what's going to happen. So I was willing innocently. He had me kneel in front of him. He was sitting on the edge of a bed. The room was very crowded. There were probably 15, 20 people in that bedroom. And but he didn't have me come at once, but he said, I will whisper to so-and-so here what I'm going to have him say. And you whisper it quietly to your neighbors around on this side of the room, and you will be the witnesses to the fact that kneel in front of him on a pillow, and I did. And he took his fists like this in his hand and held them outside my head like that, and he said, now listen, I'm going to put my fists against your temples, and the moment you feel my fists on your temples, you will please stop thinking if you can, and the first words that come into your head, say them, he said. I said, all right. I thought this was very exciting, you see. I didn't know what he was going to make me say. You'll hear in a minute. Mind you, I was a shy boy, just pre-adolescent, you see. Frightfully shy. So I thought, this is wonderful. I'm the act, don't you know? I'm the act. So he looked at me very, very seriously for a moment. Suddenly put his hands like that, and words came into my head like a foreign body, and with them a tremendous feeling. And I didn't say anything. I was so excited by the feelings and the words, the apparition, as it were, of the words. And he said to me, say it, he said to me like that. And I then blurted it out, you see. I was so terrified by that time, so to speak, in a nice way. And I said, I love you. You don't get small boys doing this in public. They are much shyer than girls. Don't kid yourself. Rudyard Kipling knew that very well. And the roar of laughter in the room was indescribably proof of what he'd done. And he did this deliberately, you see, because it was an easy thing to do from an emotional point of view. I was devoted to him. And that I should get the very words like a foreign body, that was part of his art. He was a tremendous person. He was a genuine occultist. And I traveled with him. You see, I knew him long before Dora knew him. He was at his physical prime, there's no doubt about it then. All the things she said were true of him, they were trebly true then. You just walk your legs off, and so on. But I traveled with him, and you know when you travel with someone, you really get to know him. You see? You see how he is in the bedroom, and how he is, I was going to be even more intimate. In all circumstances, you get to know him extremely well. And he was solid all through. He was just what he was. At all times, he was what he was. He was what he was. For later, I was asked again to house party at Mrs. Holbrook's, and this was in the winter of 1904. And I had by then become so devoted to him and to Basil and so on. They were about to go round the world. And I just couldn't stand it, that they should go away. So, you know how it is, a boy doesn't know about those things when he's young. I proposed myself as somebody to travel with them. And C.W.L. said very gravely, well, that would be very nice, but I don't know how the money part of it could be managed. So I wrote to my father, see. I thought my father had endless wealth. He looked very prosperous. I wrote to my father and said I wanted to go around the world. Well, it wasn't so bad in those days. In the end, the round the world ticket cost only $507, first class. Pretty good. Well, anyhow, the letter got there, and my father wrote me back, but it didn't reach me before we left Newton Highlands, and when I got home, my family said to me, aren't you going? I left Leadbeater in Chicago, and he traveled to the coast, and C.J. was in this country by that time, taking his place, as it were, in the field. An equally remarkable man in some ways more remarkable. Anyhow, I got home, and my father said to me, I said you could go, and I thought perhaps you would be able to start more or less at once, and so on. So we thought about it overnight, and finally I decided I would go. It was for me to decide, you understand, young as I was. And it was by then Sunday, and there was no money, you see, with which to travel. You can't get money on a Sunday in a hick town like that. And so my father rang up the bank. Everybody knew everybody else in that little town, you know. He said, my son is going around the world, just casually, you know, that was a wonderful thing to be able to say. My son is going around the world starting on Monday, and we haven't got the money, and he has to leave on such and such a train in order to get to Chicago, to catch such a train in order to catch this man out in California. So they all agreed that we would meet in the bank, and when the time lock operated, the teller would run in and get a wad of money and give it to my father, and there was a taxi at the door, and we galloped down to the railway station. Everybody knew everybody else, so they held the train for 5 minutes, you see. I got on board the train, came to Chicago, traveled to California alone, and there I met him again. And we went around the world together. Fabulous business. That's really fabulous. I don't think anybody knows what those people were like, you know that? We don't have those kind of theosophists anymore. The kind of people who, at a signal, give up everything and go and do it. Who suffer incredible inconveniences and pain and misery. You heard about it from Dora. I mean the rawness of existence in those days for the Theosophical Society. It's just, you can't communicate it. The membership was tiny, you see, and you had to suffer and struggle and do the momentous thing. The number of people who have taken off like that, and I don't mean in some wild goose chase, but from some deep motives, was large proportionate to the members then. Mrs. Besant had that too, as you well know. How many people would stand before the secular society and tell them that she'd become a theosophist, you see, just sort of overnight? It takes enormous courage to reverse your life, but they did that kind of thing. It is a wonderful thing to be near, and some of it rubs off on you. And entirely inexplicable. It is no good trying to understand people like that. They are greater than we are, you see. Count Hermann Kaiserling, a very well-known European philosopher, was in Adyar when Krishnaji was being preserved and his life saved, and he was being sheltered that he might do his work. And he's doing his work, you observe. And Count Hermann Kaiserling, a very wonderful man with great cultivation, knowing nothing of theosophy except what books he's read and Plato and stuff like that, lived there very peaceably for many days, and he talked to these people, they were kind to him and so on, and he wrote of them, and without the background he could see this, you see, because he was a gifted man. He said of Mrs. Besant, many people think she's superficial because she's always so eager and rushes into things and so on. He said, on the contrary, she governs her life from a level so deep that the ordinary person cannot see that depth. They were like that, you see. They lived ordinary lives, if you like, superficially, not Leadbeater. He was always a little different. But they governed their lives according to the needs. But the governing was from way down inside, right? Tremendous people in that way. Well, we don't have them anymore. the times, of course, it was all organized like that. You had people of really heroic stature at the beginning. I mean, they were giants, Blavatsky and Alcott. Mr. Besson and Leadbeater were, I don't say lesser, but they were of a different stamp. But greatness was there, a kind of marvelous greatness. And when they brought you near them, if you could live near them, you could feel it. It was like living near a dynamo.
That was a wonderful recollection of listening to the memories by Mr. Fritz Kunz, his meeting with Colonel Olcott, Leadbeater, Annie Besant. And the good news is that during the centenary of the RDR archives, a project was also being taken up to convert many of such recordings, audio recordings, into the digital format, and they may be made available to many of our members and benefactors worldwide, so that we can hear the talks of so eminent theosophists live in their own voice, in their own words directly. So we all are looking forward to that. And now, coming to the last part of today's gathering, we invite Sister Jayashree Kannan again to share with us in her serene voice a song composed by Rabindranath Tagore, the famous philosopher poet, who also visited T.S. Adyar during his lifetime and stayed in Blavatsky Bungalow. The title of the song is Antara Mama, invoking to cleanse the mind, which is the root of our spiritual liberation or bondage. So let us hear this song, Antara Mama, by Rabindranath Tagore, sung by Sister Jayashree.
Antara mama vikasita karo, antara taro he. Antara mama vikasita karo, antara taro he. Nirmal kara, ujjwal kara, sundara karo he. Antara mama vikasita karo, antara taro he. Jagrata karo, udbhaya karo, nirbhaya karo he. Mangala karo, niralasane, shamshaya karo he. Antara mama vikasita karo, antara taro he. Jukta karo he, sabhar sange, mukta karo he bandh. Sanchara karo sakala karme, shant tomachand.
Once again, with this uplifting and beautiful chant offered by Jayashree's sweet voice, we come to the end of today's celebration of Adyar Day. We want to thank to Sister Marja Artama for organizing this event, as always with deep care and dedication. We want to thank Sister Jayashree for sharing the chains on this occasion, and also to TSA Archives for the valuable audio of Fritz Kunz, and of course to all the delegates from all over the world that joined us today here in Zoom, through YouTube also. And we would like to close this session with a few words of our former international president, Ms. Radha Burnier, Radhaji, that are words dedicated to all theosophists around the world. And she says, for members of the Theosophical Society all over the world, Adyar is not only the international headquarters of the Theosophical Society, but it is also a symbol of the ideas which Theosophists cherish. It is a center of spiritual power and peace, which draws forth deep devotion and aspiration to truth. It is also a spring of inspiration and guidance, refreshing the hearts of many generations of members. Adyar has proven to be a real ashram, for within has always existed the presence, example, and instruction to dissipate doubt and fear. Its atmosphere gives stability to those inner movements in the individual, which take him nearer to the realization of peace and freedom. There is something of the atmosphere of the eternal in its tranquility. Adyar's work is accomplished not merely by the few who have the great privilege of living here, but by all members of the society who have Adyar in their hearts and realize its role. So with these words, we come to the end. Namaste, Vanakkam, adios, Dasvidanya, adeus, adieu, bye, and thank you to all. Happy Adyar Day for everyone all around the world.
Somebody wants to